Welcome to this week's edition of Flashback Friday, your opportunity to get some good review by listening to episodes from the past that Jason has handpicked to help you today in the present and propel you into the future. Enjoy.
Speakers, publishers, consultants, coaches, and info marketers unite. The Speaking of Wealth show is your roadmap to success and significance. Learn the latest tools, technologies, and tactics to get more bookings, sell more products, and attract more clients. If you're looking to increase your direct response sales, create a big-time personal brand, and become the go-to guru, the Speaking of Wealth show is for you. Here's your host, Jason Hartman.
Welcome to the Speaking of Wealth show. This is your host, Jason Hartman, where we discuss profit strategies for speakers, publishers, authors, consultants, coaches, info marketers, and just go over a whole bunch of exciting things that you can use to increase your business, to make your business more successful and more passive and more automated and more scalable. So we will be back with a great interview. Be sure to visit us at speakingofwealth.com. You can take advantage of our blog, subscribe to the RSS feed, and many other resources for free at speakingofwealth.com. And we will be back with a great interview for you in less than 60 seconds.
You know, sometimes I think of Jason Hartman as a walking encyclopedia on the subject of creating wealth.
Well, you're probably not far off from the truth, Penny, because Jason actually has a 3-book set on creating wealth that comes with 60 digital download audios.
Yes, Jason has that unique ability to make you understand investing the way it should be. It's a world where anything less than 26% annual return is disappointing.
I love how he actually shows us how we can be excited about these scary times and exploit the incredible opportunities this present economy has afforded us.
We can pick local markets untouched by the economic downturn, exploit packaged commodities investing, and achieve exceptional returns safely and securely.
I also like how he teaches you to protect the equity in your home before it disappears and how to outsource your debt obligations to the government.
And the entire set of advanced strategies for wealth creation is being offered at a savings of $94.
That's right, and to get your Creating Wealth Encyclopedia series, complete with over 60 hours of audio and 3 books, just go to jasonhartman.com/store.
If you want to be able to sit back and collect checks every month, just like a banker, Jason's Creating Wealth Encyclopedia series is for you.
Hey, it's my pleasure to welcome Yaro Starak to the show. He is an acclaimed blogger and internet entrepreneur from Australia, and he's coming to us today from Melbourne. Yaro, welcome. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Good. The pleasure is all mine. So give us a little bit of your background real quickly and how you got to where you are now, and then let's kind of go back and look at some of the things that made it all work.
No problem. The problem with my background story is I've been online since 1998 now, and that's a long time in internet years. So there's a long version and a really long version of my background story, but I'll try and keep it short for you. I started online thanks to university. They gave me a free internet account, which led to starting my first website about a card game I used to play in high school and university. And that led to having my first little online business, which was a card shop and a trading forum. And then that led to a really strong interest in business online. So the dot-com boom was happening and I wanted to have something a bit bigger. So I started a proofreading service. Basically, I was acting as a middleman between university students and lecturers and PhDs, people who were helping them with their academic writing. And that was my sort of main business for a number of years after I graduated from university. And as part of running that business, I was exposed to this thing called blogging in the year 2004. And I then installed a blog on my proofreading business and discovered that writing about proofreading is a really dry and boring subject. But writing a blog about the process of running a business and everything to do with being an entrepreneur online was very interesting to me. So I registered the entrepreneurs-journey.com blog, intending it to be a hobby because that domain name is way too long and it's got a hyphen in it. But it was something to play with. And 8 years later, I am still writing that blog. It became my main business, and I sold everything else I was doing. And I basically teach people how to make money blogging and continue to write my own blog.
So your monetization strategy then through Entrepreneurs-Journey is to sell advice and educational products, info products, right?
It is. It's changed, and it's it's basically been a combination of things over the years. And like I first started, like most people do, with advertising, and that was just putting banners on my site. I tried Google's AdSense program because a lot of my blogging peers were using it, but it wasn't great for my site. I only made like $1 a day, and I had much better results selling advertising directly to my sponsors. Then I got into affiliate marketing, which is basically what you're saying. I found software services and programs and events that I liked and would recommend it to my audience. I had a newsletter by then too, so I would recommend things through my email newsletter and make money from the commissions from that. And then after 2 years, once I'd basically learned everything I could to get my blog up to the sort of $5,000 to $10,000 a month mark, I felt like I had something of value to teach people. I built my audience up, I built my newsletter up, I built my income up. That's when I started teaching my own programs as well. So, and along the way, there's been all kinds of other things to experiment with, but predominantly it's advertising income, affiliate income, and selling your own products and services.
Fantastic. So what are some of the things that really work in a blog? I mean, nowadays, when you say blogging, that's sort of expected. That's the price of entry, It's kind of one of the basics. Everybody should have a blog nowadays, obviously, right? But what's the real difference between having a blog with a lot of followers and just having a blog?
It's a very strategic question, this one, Jason. Like, people could have a blog purely as a side tool that they put on their information website for the product or service that their company sells. And that's often what happens. The blog isn't really the main thing. It's just one mechanism they're using to deliver some content, which hopefully will bring back clients or customers to, whatever they sell. For me, my blog has always been the website. There is no other websites. The blog is the website. The blog is what I produce content on every week. It's how I reach people, how I get people onto my newsletter. I make sales from it directly as well as through advertising, like I said. So, when it comes to this, it's really, are you going to be writing a blog for the sake of making money from advertising and selling your products and building your personal brand? And in that case, the blog is your platform. Or do you already have, for example, an e-commerce website that's basically a shopping cart full of products, and the blog is just something you add to that as a way to have more than just product pages on your website. It's, it's a way to put content on your site, start building a bit more of a connection with your buyers of whatever products you sell. And that's a different strategy to what I do, obviously. So the decision of how you use a blog is very strategic, and it would be the first thing I would look at before starting a blog. You don't sort of just throw one up there. Nowadays, anyway, back in the day, that's what a lot of people did. I did that. I threw one up there and see what happened. And you could still do that. It depends what you're trying to achieve. If you have some very specific business goals in mind, then you really need to use those goals as the driving force on how you decide the strategy behind what you're going to do with a blog.
Now, when we talk about blogging, the vast majority of people think of text and traditional text blog, but podcasting is really just an audio blog, if you will. When did you start podcasting?
I started podcasting a year after blogging. So 2006 was the first time. In fact, I may have played with audio a bit in 2005, really early days, before iTunes was really around. And for me, it's a funny story, actually. If you can hear, my accent's a bit mixed. I'm born in Australia, but I've got very strong Canadian undertones to it. And I was actually at university, and I went to one of my professors in an attempt to try and raise my grade on a paper I'd done, because he's a professor that was well known for being a bit lenient. If you go up there and sort of argue your point, he might bump you up one grade. So I thought I'd have a go at this, and I went up and saw him and started talking about my paper. And while we were talking, he said to me, you've got a great voice for radio. I could just listen to you talk, all day. And I was like, I've always kind of wanted to be the radio star. Maybe I can, give this a go. And as you know now, Jason, we're doing it right now. So at the time, I had a little portable iRiver, which is very similar to an iPod. It was the competitor at the time. and it had a microphone jack on it, or a microphone actually built into the machine. So I just hit record on that and started talking into it, and then put those files up initially as my first podcast, which was just me rambling. In fact, I used to sit down by the river in Brisbane where I grew up, and I'd ramble for 20 minutes to 30 minutes about some subject related to business, and stuck it on my blog and called it a podcast. And that was my first experiment into it. A few episodes later, I tried my first ever interview, which proved quite popular too. So I continued to do interviews, much like we're doing now. And, it's not something I do every single month, but I have been doing it since 2006. And there's always a few episodes going up every year. And I love it, and people love it. And I think, like you said, it's another form of kind of like blogging. It's a content creation and distribution method that allows you to reach new people. Plus, it has the added benefit of that slightly more personal connection, being a voice coming at you rather than, just reading the words on the screen. So I love it as an additional content distribution tool.
What do you like better when it comes to blogging? Do you like blogging in text format, meaning you're writing, or do you like blogging in audio format, podcasting, where you're just talking?
Oh, it's tough to choose. I think I'm more succinct and clearer in writing. It's just the nature of the vehicle there.
Yeah, I agree.
You use fewer words when you write versus when you speak. And I think the fact that it's not off the cuff as much with writing, like right now, you're going to get a lot more pauses and breaks and words that I wouldn't use in my writing with what I'm saying. And it just works okay with podcasting. With writing, it'd actually look a little bit amateurish if you were to look at the actual words I was saying now. So I think they both have their place, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I love writing, though. I will always consider myself a writer first before anything else, mainly because that's what I've been doing for the longest, and it suits me the best. I can sit in a cafe and write, where sitting in a cafe and talking to yourself, doesn't quite come across as normal. I mean, nowadays you can get away with that, pretending you're talking to someone on a phone, but it's not the same. So for me, the aspect of sitting in the cafe, updating my blog, that's always been my ideal lifestyle, and I've been lucky enough to live that for the last 8 years now. So that for me is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So talk to us about some of the more advanced strategies, if you will, in terms of blogging properly. And I've got to also ask you, Yaro, and I don't want to forget, do you blog on other people's sites or just your own?
I've been writing almost entirely on my own blog for the entire time I've been blogging. There have been guest posts I've done on other people's sites, in particular in the early days. And I think this ties in well with what your first question is there. What would I do to grow an audience? When my blog was new, I did more of that kind of work. I would go out there and find other blogs to potentially write for, plus online magazines, websites, press releases, any places to seed my content to bring new people back to my blog. After about maybe a year or two of occasionally doing that sort of marketing, I had traction, I had momentum, and I found that I would just naturally bring in new audience just by producing my own content. So I pulled back on that, but it's something I recommend everyone does. And in fact, probably next year I will get back to doing something like that, because I need to start bringing in new people. And unless you're prepared to pay money to buy advertising on Google or Facebook or banners across websites and networks, then you have to find ways to do it for free using your own content. And one of the best ways is to get yourself featured on other people's sites, whether it's with a guest post or an interview in a podcast like this, or writing some press releases and syndicating it across the press network. There's lots of options you can use your content for in other ways. But I always think the most important thing is to be writing your own blog first. Make sure there's a regular stream of content there, that you're keeping people updated with what you're doing, what you're thinking, helping them. Then the additional content can be used in marketing methods, so seeding content in other places.
And blogging techniques and strategies. And, I guess some of the common questions here, but please take it to a more advanced level, if you will. Is there an optimum length? Do you really consciously think about inserting certain keywords in your blog post? Or do you just write what you want and people follow because they like it?
Primarily it's the subject matter more important than anything else. So, playing with the keywords and the length of the content doesn't matter as much as the substance of the content. So, looking at what you're writing about, who you're writing it for, what's current, using things like controversy, any kind of hook or angle. Those are the things that make for good content. Yes, you can look at your keywords. Yes, you can look at an optimal length of an article in terms of distribution and sharing, but you'll find there's advice for both long articles and short articles that is valid. For example, often the longer articles won't necessarily be read by as many people, at least not from start to finish, but the people that do read it will be much more engaged with your work, which can often be better than, say, an article that's shorter, and it might reach a whole lot more people, but you don't really touch them quite as strongly as you do with the longer article. So they forget about it just as quickly. So sometimes reaching a small group of people with a much stronger touch point rather than reaching a lot of people but barely even scratching the surface of their interest is better. And that's often the angle I've gone for. And I think the best advice I can give people who are looking for the optimum way to start building a successful blog today is to focus on less content, but higher quality content, and some kind of marketing plan for each piece of content after you produce it. So the idea now is, rather than aiming for, and I want to qualify this is for people who are experts, consultants, teachers, service providers, anyone who's basically trying to build a brand around a product or service or their expertise. If you're a news blogger, this is not the right advice. If you're a news blogger, you're just covering an industry, you're meant to write lots of shorter posts about everything going on each day. And you might be writing 10 to 20 articles a day. That's not something I've done. That's a different type of blogging to the sort of expert blogging that I've done, the authority blogging. And if that's what you are, then aiming for one really quality piece of content a week, I think, is a great goal, provided that after you produce that content, you put a little bit of effort to make sure people know about it. In my case, social sharing is my primary way of doing that. So every time I produce an article, I will seed it on Facebook, of course. I will put it on Twitter. I will Google Plus it. I will LinkedIn share it. And depending on how that goes, I may do additional things with it too. Often something will catch on in one of those platforms, but not another one. So I might go back a couple of days later and re-say it again on Twitter if it didn't catch on or something like that. It might just be a case of interacting with the people who talk about it on Facebook or Twitter. But those things, if they like and share and tweet, brings in new audience to that content. And it's much better to have something that's really powerful, one piece of content, and you go out there and tell people about it and get them engaged in that. Then you've got 10 articles coming out each day that really don't get a chance to reach people. It's all happening too quickly. They're getting buried into your archives before people even find it. So that's the platform I've been building over the sort of last 2 or 3 years. That's the way I blog. It's also easier to maintain. Writing one article a week or doing one interview a week is a lot easier than the old, 5 days a week sort of schedule that I used to have when I was younger. But that was a different time, and I had sort of a different plan with my blogging, and I just didn't have the momentum yet. So it really depends where you're at with your blog.
So when you say higher quality content, I know this may sound like a silly question, but try and define that for the listeners, if you would.
It is a difficult one to define. There's an element of this.
Quality is in the eye of the beholder, maybe, sometimes.
It's also in the statistics of the results in some ways, too. If you're looking for business outcomes, you might think your article is great, and it could be great, but if no one else cares, then it's not great in terms of business outcomes. So it's not something I can give an answer that will guarantee a result, because like anything, if you try and go viral, you very rarely go viral. It's often when you don't try, you're just trying to keep providing value, that something takes off. And sometimes it's the thing that you don't expect to take off that does. But that being said, when I first started blogging, I developed this framework called the pillar article, or the pillar content. And that phrase basically means it forms the pillars of a great blog. And I advise my members, my students, to focus on creating pillar content all the time if they can, but definitely early on. And why it's, I guess, more available early on is because when you start a blog, you've got a lot of things to cover that you just need to establish in order to build those pillars. And one of the best examples I can give of that is writing definitions that are relevant for your audience. So whatever market you're in, you no doubt have certain key terms that people use that are really insider terms. So in my space, you've got things like SEO. You've got things like, pillar is another example. What's a pillar article? You might define all the different keywords that relate to, in my case, blogging. So I would define what it means to be a news blogger versus an authority blogger. And these are things that, from an outsider's point of view, it doesn't even make sense. So you kind of have to bring people who are new and give them these definitions. And the good thing about doing like a big set of these definitions is they become solid pieces of content that will rank well in Google for those phrases, and also bring in the new audience and slowly educate them to the point where they're a bit more advanced in their subject understanding, and they got there because of you. So they tie their growth in understanding to your ability to teach them, which helps you cement that expertise. So all the time I'm producing articles that define phrases and concepts I use. For example, I've written about the 80-20 rule. I've written about the theory of constraints. I've written about social proof. I've written about learned optimism. These are all things that are very important to me as a business person. But by writing about them and defining them, I create great content. I teach my readers. It gets shared and so on. So that's a format of a pillar. Without going too long here, the other types of pillar articles I defined when I came up with this concept were things like a controversy article. I've seen some bloggers get great exposure by simply taking a counterpoint to whatever is the accepted norm in a very hot topic, or a very controversial topic. For example, my friend of mine, Al Westfala, runs a car blog. When he first started writing his car blog, he would basically review cars and be blatant with his opinion of crap cars. And, anyone who's complaining about something often gets a lot more traction. So that's one way to do it. You could go also the counterpoint. Whenever I say be controversial, I always want to say be prepared for the inevitable hit back you're going to take from people who don't share your point of view. If, for example, you could be saying right now you don't believe in gay marriage, and you could write an entire blog post on that if you're writing a political blog, but you've got to be prepared for everyone who does believe in gay marriage to have a go at you. But one good thing about that, it's attention, it's engagement, it's interaction. And that's good for a blog. Even if it is necessarily a little bit more difficult to deal with on a personal level, it is a form of compelling content. And that's what bloggers are trying to do. So definitions, controversy, I think top lists are great. That simply means writing a list of the top 10, top 20, top 50 best somethings in your audience, in your industry. It might be the top 50 best tennis players or best looking female tennis players if you're in that space. Or, it might be something like the top 10 best platform for running your email newsletter in my space. And you write a little review of each one, you link to them, and that can create great content. So top lists, definitions, controversy, and I've got a bunch of other types of great pillar content, but this interview would be much longer if I went into all of them.
Right, yeah, good. That's great information, though. Great information, definitely. So pillar content's important, and that whole concept of teaching people stuff, and they associate that learning and growth with you. I think that is just a critical and excellent point that you made. The other thing I might add to what you said is not just defining some of the things that you mentioned, like the 80-20 rule, et cetera, but also inventing some new thought. Maybe the pillar concept is your new thought, new contribution to the space. I don't know, but inventing some new vocabulary words or new concepts, and I think that can make you very unique as well.
I actually I coined a phrase to basically explain coining a phrase. I call it a language identifier. Uh-huh. So if you get identified with a certain phrase, like you said, pillar articles for me, that was very much my stamp on the world of teaching about blogging. It's a great way to demonstrate your expertise, spread your name. So if you can come up with these sorts of phrases, I actually wrote an article about language identifying as a way to try and come up with a language identifier. Didn't quite catch on as good as pillar articles, but you're exactly right. That is a great technique.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, and anything in the realm of podcasting that you want to share?
Oh, well, podcasting, what I love about the format of podcasting is, especially from a person conducting an interview, if you can sit there and ask the right questions at the right time, you can produce amazing content by not being the person who actually produces it, because obviously it's the other person being interviewed that says the smart things, hopefully.
I think we're doing this right now.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And I've found that if I to give one piece of advice for podcasting, and this has served me well from the very beginning 8 years ago, was to have a genuine curiosity about what the other person is saying. And if you don't understand what they're saying, asking why. And I found it's particularly good to get the how-to, the steps out of people. If there's time in an interview to cover it. For example, if I would talk about blogging, and I, like you kind of did before, I would say, I just wrote quality content. And then you would say to me, well, how do you write quality content? And then I would explain pillar concepts. So that's kind of what happened in this interview. And I find if you always have that natural curiosity as you're listening to a person you're interviewing, they will say things that for them, it's just part of their knowledge. It's something that they've understood because they've gone through the process, and they forget a little bit that it's not common knowledge for everyone else. So as a person conducting an interview, if you don't understand or you're a little bit curious about how exactly to go about doing something, that's when you want to stop and say, okay, that's really good, but I didn't exactly understand. How did you build that website? Did you just set up WordPress and buy a domain name and then magically 1,000 people a day started visiting your blog? That's that sort of thing where I go, no, tell me, how did you get the traffic? Because that's the really interesting stuff. So how do you get all these people to listen to your podcast, Jason? What do you do to tell people about your podcast? That's the sort of question I love to know the answer to.
Right, yeah. And I find with podcasting and blogging, but maybe especially podcasting, that it's very organic. I wish with my different podcasts that I publish, I could make them grow faster and, throw money at the problem, kind of the way government does. It doesn't work too well for them, obviously. But it's kind of an organic thing, really. You just produce good stuff. People find you. People refer you. I mean, you can play with the iTunes algorithm a little bit and that kind of stuff. But
yeah, I mean, there's always advertising, of course. Depends if you want to.
I haven't found that to work very well. I've done it. Honestly, with podcasting, I haven't found it to work that well. Hey, have you?
Oh, I've not ever, paid money to promote my podcast. I have to admit that it's been difficult to sort of watch new people come along in my space as a podcaster and have tremendous fast growth because iTunes has featured them as a new artist in this sort of boom of podcasting, where as someone who's been doing a podcast since 2006 and never got the opportunity to be featured as a new artist on iTunes. So, they've very quickly grown 2 or 3 times the size of audience that my own podcast has had. So I think, for anyone listening to this, if you're about to start a podcast, one of the best things you can do is make sure you get that opportunity to be a featured new podcast on iTunes, because that's a great way to kickstart a new show.
Sure it is. And that's the first 2 months, right? I didn't have that opportunity with my shows. I don't know if they even did that back then, or they did it the same way they do it now, but I certainly didn't know about it in the old days. I started podcasting in 2005, so I don't know what they were doing. Maybe I was featured and I didn't even know it. I'm not sure.
Well, there wasn't the amount of people listening to podcasts out there back then to make a feature worthwhile.
Right, so, fair enough.
It's almost like you want to start again. Like, I actually thought about this of, why don't I just change the name of my podcast, relaunch it, and then it will be new and fresh, which may not be the bad idea.
Yeah. I've actually considered that as well. I think that's something that maybe we'll call them legacy podcasters, the older ones like us, ought to consider. It's worth consideration. I haven't done it, but I have thought about it.
And it's a rebranding exercise too. I've often thought that maybe I don't want to be the Entrepreneur's Journey podcast. I want to be the blogging podcast instead. So, and take my direction a little bit towards that more. But
yeah, good stuff. Well, Yaro, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, Jason, I think we've covered some good stuff in a short amount of time. So thank you for having me on the show. And, I love talking about podcasting and blogging, so happy to do it all day long. And
you've got several websites, but you always say the best way to find you is just to Google Yaro, Yaro, right?
That's right. I'm going for the Madonna and the Oprah thing, single name celebrity. So Yaro, that's it. And
then when you get super successful later in your career, you can change your name to the blogger formerly known as Yaro.
You're the second person to say that. to me recently, Jason.
I just thought of it right now, but anyway,
yeah, Prince all the way.
Yeah. Hey, it was great having you on from down under, and keep in touch, and we'd love to have you back on the show. Thanks, Yaro.
Thanks, Jason.
This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company, all rights reserved. For distribution or publication rights and media interviews, please visit www.hartmanmedia.com or email media@hartmanmedia.com. Nothing on this show should be considered specific personal or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and the host is acting on behalf of Platinum Properties Investor Network, Inc. exclusively.